Earlier today, I went to the supermarket to grab just a few things, and I had a nice short list of stuff to get, which was a piece of steak, some potatoes, and some apples. As I was shopping, I quickly realized that I had to figure out if I wanted a filet, or a New York strip, or a ribeye, or maybe even a T-bone steak. Then I had to figure out if I wanted russet potatoes, or white potatoes, or sweet potatoes, or even purple potatoes. And then I had to figure out if I wanted Cortland apples, or Fuji apples, or Honeycrisp apples, or Golden Delicious apples. As a developing guitarist, you have to get comfortable with the idea of making choices in the moment. All of the greatest musicians have developed their reaction time to the point where they can instinctively make intentional decisions in a split second. I like the grocery shopping analogy because, in my experience, a big part of becoming a better player is understanding how different musical flavors and different musical textures can be combined together in unique and creative ways. So how exactly do you go about practicing that? Let's break it down in today's video. How's it going, everybody? I'm Nate Comp from Dymecast, and today's video is the 5th episode in our series that focuses on creating expressive guitar melodies using the power of emotional contrast in multiple dimensions. If you missed any of the previous episodes in this series, definitely check out the playlist that we've got set up. It has all of these lessons in it. Today's episode is going to focus on a musical principle that I use all the time in my own playing, which is the idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. This is what I often call the 1 + 1 = 3 aspect of musical behavior, and it's all about the application of two or more distinctly different musical concepts at the same time. You can create some great sounding music when you apply this idea of simultaneous interactions, and in my experience, I've come up with some really cool things that I probably wouldn't have ever played if I had only focused on practicing musical concepts one at a time individually. Before I get into some examples of the 1 + 1 = 3 concept, I think it's a good idea to start with a quick review of the most important things that I've covered up to this point. Back in episode 2, I introduced the concept of melodic shape and melodic contour. And one of the things that I had mentioned in that video was the emotional impact that is associated with the pitch direction of a melody. As a general observation, ascending pitch movement tends to communicate a feeling of excitement or momentum, okay? Maybe something like this, okay? Descending pitch, on the other hand, tends to communicate more of a feeling of arrival or finality or conclusion. All right, that might be something like this. Another thing I'd mentioned in that second episode was the emotional impact that is associated with different types of pitch distance. All right, and I made the observation that all things being equal, repeated pitches as well as stepwise pitch movements tend to be the most pleasing to the ear, and they feel the most musical. The use of conjunct melodic motion or smooth melodic contour will contribute a feeling of connection between individual melodic notes. And in general, small pitch distances are the ones that make the most sense to the average listener. The observation that stepwise pitch movement is the most singable form of melodic motion really helps to explain why some melodies are just so relatable and so accessible to the average person. Maybe something like this. Now, on the flip side of that, when it comes to the emotional impact of melodic skips and melodic leaps, the use of disjunct melodic motion or angular melodic contour or wide melodic contour, that's going to contribute a more dramatic and attention-grabbing quality to a melody. Leaping pitch movement is the hardest type of pitch motion for the average person to sing along with. So you don't want to go too crazy with lots of large jumping pitch movements in your phrasing, but one well-placed melodic leap can really bring a phrase to life. Maybe something like this. third episode of this series, I'd introduced the concept of tonal hierarchy, which is the idea that every single note in the entire chromatic scale has some degree of connection to the overall key center of the music. Organizing a key center in this way allows you to visualize the entire spectrum of musical emotions that exists within the context of any tonality, with the most consonant resolution notes of the key located in the center of the tonal hierarchy, and then the most dissonant tension notes of the key located out at the edge of the tonal hierarchy. One thing that I didn't really emphasize previously, but I will right now, is that you need to know how to spell this tonal hierarchy in every single major key, which means that you need to know the musical alphabet spelling as well as the tonal interval relationships for every single major key all the way around the circle of fifths. So if I said to you, okay, we're in the key of A, right, you should be able to recite the letter names and the interval functions for the entire spectrum of that tonality from the center out to the edge. All right, so A is the root, E is the fifth, C sharp is the major third, B is the second, F sharp is the sixth, and so on. Okay. In future videos, I'm going to cover the arrangement of tonal hierarchy that exists for music that is played in a minor tonality. And then I'll even get into the emotional spectrum that exists for various types of modes and other more exotic types of scales. But for now, I would recommend that you focus on really nailing down your knowledge of every major key. The major scale is the grandfather of all scales, and a huge part of understanding musical behavior in any style of music begins with a solid working knowledge of major tonalities and major keys and major scales. In the previous episode, I had made the observation that there is an additional emotional component that you have to consider within the concept of tonal hierarchy, which is the octave and the register that you play in. Different octaves and different registers of the same tonal function have different emotional qualities associated with them. When I'm working on this idea with my private students, I like to sum it up this way. Tonal consonances sound good in every octave. These are the tonal functions that create a feeling of resolution. But higher register consonances have a tendency to feel slightly brighter, while lower register consonances have a tendency to feel slightly darker or a little bit earthier. If I play a melodic phrase that concludes on a higher register consonance, that doesn't feel the same as a melodic phrase that ends on a lower register consonance. Even though the tonal function of the concluding note is exactly the same thing. Tonal dissonances are going to sound restless in every octave, right? These are the tonal functions that create a feeling of tension. But higher register dissonances actually have a tendency to feel slightly less dissonant, while lower register dissonances have a tendency to feel even more dissonant, right? If I play a melodic phrase that concludes on a dissonance but in a higher register, that doesn't feel the same as a melodic phrase that ends on a much lower register dissonance. Even though the tonal function of that concluding note is exactly the same thing. The most important thing to take away from these examples is that there is a lot of nuance within the concept of tonal hierarchy. And like I mentioned in the previous episode, the devil is in the details. When I'm focusing on creating emotional contrast in my phrasing using variations of melodic shape and melodic contour, my main concerns are the direction of the pitch between notes and the distance in pitch between notes. On the other hand, if I'm focusing on creating emotional contrast in my phrasing using tonal hierarchy, my main concerns are the tonal function of each note within the key center, and then the balance of close to distant relationships that exist within the spectrum of consonance and dissonance. When it comes to applying the 1 + 1 = 3 concept, here's how you can begin to combine the individual ideas of melodic contour and tonal hierarchy at the same time. Let's say we were in the key of G major. and I asked you to play a melodic phrase using just the consonant notes of the tonality. Now, the center of tonal hierarchy contains the tonal functions of the root, the third, and the fifth. So in the key of G major, that would give us the notes G, B, and D, which are the notes of a G major triad. So if I asked you to play a root 3-5 G major triad phrase, would you automatically assume that the melodic contour of that phrase is ascending, root 3-5? Well, what if the melodic contour of that root 3-5 G major triad phrase actually descended by using melodic leaps, root 3-5? What if I used a change in pitch direction by ascending from the root to the third with a skip, and then descending to the fifth with a leap, right? Root 3-5. And what if I flip that contour around by maybe descending from the root to the third with a leap, and then ascending from the third to the fifth with a skip? So root 3-5. Okay. The important thing to notice is that if I mapped out all four of those examples in tonal hierarchy, they're all the same tonal functions within the key center, but it's the changes in melodic contour and melodic shape that have such a big impact on how we experience each one of those phrases. To make things even more interesting, you can take any one of those phrases and move them into higher and lower octaves. So now I could turn this root 3-5, where I'm descending in leaps, move it up an octave, root 3-5. It's all the same tonal functions, but now I've got a change in register, which changes how you feel each phrase. Remember my grocery shopping analogy of steak, potatoes, and apples? Well, in this case, I'm shopping for a root in the third and the fifth, and I have to make some intentional choices as far as the flavor and the texture of those musical ingredients. If there was one thing to take away from today's lesson as far as the real magic of the 1 + 1 = 3 concept, it is this. Describing melodic behavior in terms of contour is all about pitch direction and pitch distance. But when you combine the dimension of melodic shape and contour with the dimension of tonal function, now you have to consider this, and I'll do all of this over a C major chord, okay? If I decide to play a repeated pitch in my melodic contour, is it a repeated consonance, like a fifth? Or is it a repeated dissonance, like a seventh? If I play a stepwise pitch motion, am I moving from consonance to dissonance? Okay, like a root to a 2, or maybe a 5 to a 4, or a root to a 7, or maybe a 3 to a 4? Or am I using stepwise motion to move from dissonance to consonance, like 4 to 3, or 4 to 5, or 7 to root, or maybe 6 to 5? What if I use stepwise pitch motion, but it's moving from dissonance to dissonance, okay? Like a flat 3 to a 2, or a 6 to a flat 7? Let's say I play a skipping motion in my melodic contour. Is my skipping motion going from consonance to dissonance, like a 5 to a 7? Or maybe a root to a 6? Or am I using skipping motion to move from dissonance to consonance, like flat 3 to root? Or flat 6 to root? What if my skipping pitch motion is actually moving from consonance to consonance, like a root to a third? Or a fifth down to a third? And finally, what if I use skipping pitch motion, but I'm going from dissonance to dissonance, like a 4 down to a 2? How about a flat 5 up to a flat 7? Finally, if I play leaping movement in my melodic contour, am I moving from consonance to dissonance, like a root up to a 6? Or maybe a 5 down to a 2? Or am I using leaping motion to go from dissonance to consonance, like a flat 7 up to a third? Or maybe a flat 5th down to a root? What if my leaping pitch motion is from consonance to consonance, like a 5th up to a third? or maybe a root down to a third. And finally, what if I use leaping pitch motion, big distance, to go from dissonance to dissonance, like a fourth up to a second, or maybe a sixth down to a seventh? Okay, so when it comes to combining contour and function, don't forget also that the octave and the register that you are playing in is an additional factor to consider when it comes to the overall emotional content of each of these melodic moves. Like I mentioned in the very first episode of this series, great melodic phrasing doesn't come from just one thing. It's all about finding the right balance between many different things all at the same time. Something that I've mentioned before regarding my own personal journey as a player is spending a good amount of time studying the real-life practices of the best musicians, and then trying to figure out exactly what they are doing and why. So with that in mind, let me play you some examples that will hopefully resonate with you in a way that you can really appreciate the power of the simultaneous interactions between melodic contour and tonal function. First off, every example that I'm going to play uses the same tonal functions of a root, third, fourth, and fifth, which means that all of these phrases are going to be based on the same emotional categories within the spectrum of tonal hierarchy. I guess you could say that these examples are from a grocery list that now has 4 items on it, okay? What I'm going to be changing from one phrase to the next is the overall order of these tonal functions, the octave and the register of these tonal functions, but most importantly, the melodic contours and the melodic shapes that are used to connect these tonal functions together from one note to the next. So let's start with a fairly simple example. Let's say I'm in the key of F major, okay? And I decide to interpret the tonal functions of root 3, 4, 5 as just a basic ascending melody with a skip and some steps, okay? I get the first phrase from When the Saints Go Marching In, right? Now, as soon as I change the order of these tonal functions, and I also change the melodic contour, the melodic shape, I'm going to get a completely new phrase, okay? Let's say I'm in the key of C major this time, okay? And let's say I change the order of the tonal functions to go 5, 3, 4, 5, root, all right? Listen to the contour of this phrase, which is the first melodic phrase for Frosty the Snowman. Interesting little side note, if you remove the first pitch from that melody, you get the first phrase from John Williams' theme that he wrote for the Indiana Jones movies. So, pretty similar to Frosty the Snowman. Now, I know it sounds crazy, but in my brain, the first phrase from When the Saints Go Marching In, and the first phrase from Frosty the Snowman, and the first phrase from the Indiana Jones theme are actually all kind of the same thing in my mind. It gets even crazier with the next couple of examples, so let's keep going, okay? This time I'm in the key of G major, okay? Once again, we're going to change the order of the tonal functions a little bit. This time it's 4, 3, 4, 3, root 5, 4, 3, root, okay? Now, take a listen to the contour of this phrase. That phrase is from the David Gilmour solo that he plays in the Pink Floyd song Mother. It's the same tonal functions, but there's a unique contour happening, and the use of descending pitch motion gives the phrase a really interesting kind of quality to it. For the next example, I'm going to go to key of A major, okay? Now, the tonal functions for this particular example, this is a slightly longer musical sentence, okay? There's a lot more of an arrangement of motion between the tonal functions, but take a listen to the contour of this phrase. Which is is the first phrase from the classic Allman Brothers song, Jessica. Once again, it's the same tonal functions as all of the other examples. Important thing to notice about this phrase is how balanced the melodic shape is. And this comes from using a great mix of ascending and descending pitch motion, right? For the final example, I'm going to build it up piece by piece so you can really hear how the combination of tonal function and register and melodic contour all work together to define the personality of a melodic phrase. For this last example, I'm going to be in the key of D major, okay? And I'm going to start with our tonal functions in the order of root 5, 4, 5, 3, 5. So here's one possible interpretation of what that could sound like in a lower register. And notice the type of contour that I'm using. Okay, so root 5, 4, 5, 3, 5. The first thing that I'm going to change about this phrase is the addition of some repeated tonal functions. So let's change from using root 5, 3, 5, 4, 5, right, to using root 5, 4, 4, 5, 3, 5. Okay, so root 5, 4, 4, 5, 3, 5. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is change the register of this phrase. So let's take that whole thing and move it up an octave, and we'll keep the same melodic contour, which would sound like this. Root 5, 4, 4, 5, 3, 5. Okay, now let's have some fun with the melodic shape and the melodic contour. Okay, remember those repeated tonal functions that I added in? Okay, well, a repeated tonal function does not necessarily have to be a repeated pitch. Anytime you have a repeated tonal function, it could also be interpreted as a leap of an octave up or down. All right, so let's change this contour. Root 5, 4, 4, 5, 3, 5. Okay, where I'm using the repeated tonal functions as repeated pitches. Let's turn it into something more angular or more jagged by using some dramatic melodic leaps. Okay, so now I'm going to go root 5, 4, 4, 5, 3, 5. Okay, the final step is let's continue with this idea of developing a jagged or angular contour by using even more melodic leaps, which is going to give us this. Root 5, 4, 4, 5, 3, 5. Which, of course, is the first melodic phrase from Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses. Right? This is one of my favorite examples of the 1 + 1 = 3 concept, because when I play this phrase, when I play that phrase for any one of my private students, nobody has any idea what song that is. But as I walk them through the process of combining tonal function and register and contour, and we put it all together, it becomes clear to them exactly how far you can go with this idea of simultaneous interactions. One little side note also about this phrase, Slash was tuned down a half step when they recorded this song, so it actually sounds like it's in the key of D flat, but physically he's playing it within the key of D major. If you have any questions about anything that I've covered in today's video, leave a comment below. We would love to help you out. And if you enjoyed this lesson, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.